We're here today for the May 2020 OC Spearos club meeting, practicing some social distancing here, so we're not able to all come together as usual, but we wanted to share some good information with you. And for this month, we're going to be talking about the basics of rigging, from how to tune your shaft to how to put your shooting line on your shaft, how to decide on shooting lines, a whole bunch of information this month that's going to be real useful for you. Here with Myrran McKean, president of the club.
Hey guys.
And I'm Brad Thompson, one of the directors, and I think we should just jump right in. Myrran, why don't you talk a little bit about what we've got laid out here?
Well, we got a variety of tools that you need for rigging, both for doing your shooting line, creating bands. There's a lot of stuff available that you can use. There's really not a lot of wrong answers. Well, there are a couple wrong answers, but there's definitely easier ways to do it and harder ways to do it. You don't need any really fancy tools, but you do need some tools that are fairly specific to make your life easy, save your knuckles, that kind of thing. Good sets of pliers. Most people have a little kit. I have a little kit. This is Brad's kit. These are good kits to bring out with you on the water, especially if you're on a boat or you're going on a trip or something like that. You're going to be carrying a variety of stuff in case your line breaks or you snap a band, you have to replace a shaft or switch out your rigging really quick because you're going to switch species. It's good to have a nice little to-go kit for yourself. Different size swivels or different size crimps, snap swivels like this. A good set of crimps. You can get these down at Spear America.
Yeah, don't buy the cheap Amazon ones. They'll rust out and turn into useless hunks of junk rapidly. The ones that Spear America carries are nice. Get yourself a good set of tool there.
Yeah, it's definitely worth it. Fishing pliers, long needle nose are a good one to go. These can be used for cutting line. They're really good for getting into the end of a band when you put in your wishbone material. You can squeeze it into the end. A couple sets. You'll need 2 sets, really, and we'll go over that later for when you're tying the restrictor knots. A lighter to burn off the ends of your lines and melt those and push them flat on the knots. That way you have more holding power. A pair of shears. These are just hospital shears. These work great because they pretty much cut everything. Not only are they a safety item that you should be carrying with you in your kit in case you need to cut off clothing in case of emergency, but they cut bands, cut shooting line, cut everything really quickly and really nicely. So there's a couple other things you could use for cutting, but these are good all-purpose and they're super cheap.
We got some soap here also.
Yeah, soap for lubrication, just standard dish soap.
And then we were talking about, Myrran, you had mentioned that there are a couple tools that some people talk about but maybe aren't as useful as they're put out to be.
Yeah, you know, I have a couple of these sitting around in the garage. These are intended to be used for putting in your wishbone material in between your bands. These apparently used to be good. I never use these, so they're not worth the 15 bucks that you're gonna spend on them. It's better just to have a pair of pliers for it. The inside diameter of these bands, you know, like maybe 10 years ago, the inside diameter on these bands was wider. Now most of the banding, at least at Spear America and pretty much anywhere else, the inside diameter is a lot smaller, so it makes getting these things in there really hard to do, and it's almost better to just hold your knot and push it in with these. Just don't waste your money on these. Leave them on the shelf. Get yourself a couple good pairs of pliers, some thin needle nose.
Yeah, I like these. You'll see why in a little bit when we're making bands, but I prefer to use these crook neck ones. I guess in my hand feel a lot better. So I always keep a normal set and a crook neck in there as well.
Yeah, another good tool for pushing in your wishbone material is just a small, thin, straight slot screwdriver. I've taken this one and I've rounded off the edges. When you're going on the inside of the bands and you have your shooting knot, you might have got it started in there, and then you can get this on the knot and push it through. But you don't want those sharp edges there to cut the inside of your band because you could have a failure on that. Little sacrificial screwdriver.
So at this point, we're going to talk about how to attach your swivel to your reel line. We're going to show you 2 different knots to do it. Myrran and I both have different knots that we use. I use San Diego jam knot, and Myrran uses a different one. We can come up with a name, but we'll teach you how to do both and you can use your own preference. To begin with, I've pulled out about 8 or 10 feet of reel line off the reel to show you how your last few wraps of your reel should be as you're setting things up. You can use this also when after you shot a shaft, maybe landed a fish, and you need to regather your line. The last 8 or 10 feet, you can see here on the line that the line is pretty much parallel. But I always do some pretty exaggerated zigzags on the last few wraps And I'm just sort of watching it down there. This is probably good. And when you cinch that down on a reel like this, that's a free spooling reel, think about it. You've got your line tight here. So when you hit a fish and the fish goes to take its first run, it's gonna pull real hard. If you have that line going vertical in itself, you run the risk of your line getting wedged down in on itself and then not actually spooling loose. So if you have it going zigzag back and forth, it's going to be laying on top of each other, and you're going to have a much better opportunity to have it come free spool like that. That way you're not worried about it getting all wedged down in there. So I'm going to go ahead, pull this back up. Doesn't look pretty, but it'll work a lot better. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to attach this line to this swivel using the San Diego jam knot. So I'm going to feed it through the eye, and I like to give myself a lot of working room on this. So I've got the swivel here in my left hand, and I'm going to put these parallel to each other. Swivel in my left hand. I'm going to give myself a loop like this, and then I'm going to come back and wrap it around this here. 1, 2, 3, 4 times. If you look up the San Diego jam knot online, it'll tell you 7 wraps, but that's on a much thinner line. With a thick line like this, you can get away with 4 or 5. That original big loop that you gave yourself, that you're going to feed your line back through it, you're going to slide it up like this, compress it on itself, and then you can slide this whole thing back down here, pull that tight. You can cut the tag end a little bit like that. And then the last little fuzzy stuff, you're going to melt yourself a little mushroom cap on there to give yourself a little bit more protection from pulling back through. Like that. Give it a nice pull. That's not going anywhere. So that's a San Diego jam knot. At this point, Myrran will take over and show you the knot that he uses to attach the swivel there.
This one's a little easier. I think it's like a Rapala. It's basically a fishing line knot. A little bit easier. Just do a single overhand and pull it through. After you get that on there, you can just put it through your line. Then we're going to come on the other side of the knot. We'll just wrap it a few times. It doesn't take many times. 3 times is fine, maybe 4. And then you're just going to come right back through that overhand. It's going to come down and cinch on itself like that. And it leaves you this loop at the end that is not coming loose. Again, this is one of those things where there's multiple ways to do this. The nice thing about this shooting line or other shooting line, kind of grips on itself really well. So I mean, you could probably, if you are in a pinch and don't know any knots, you could just do a double overhand granny and be fine on most species. If you get up into the bigger pelagics, you might want to do your homework and come up with a knot that's really going to hold. But that's a simple way. There's probably a few other ways. Same thing. Cut it off there. Get it nice and melted, and then just kind of press it. So then you end up with that.
All right, so at this point, we're going to move on to get our shaft ready to get it put on the gun and put our shooting line. In the case that we're going to be using a flopper shaft, we're going to need to tune that flopper. We'll teach you how to do that. So this is a Voto shaft that I use down in Baja. It's a heavy gauge flopper. Works good for using on the reef, just a heavy duty bulletproof shaft. I have installed on it one of these little cones that Petros or any one of the guys down at Spear America can put on for you. At first, I was a little skeptical about it, but I did notice a big difference in both the entry and exit wound on the fish. The idea behind the cone is as it slides through fish, it will sort of, not gently, but open the flesh up away from pin and the head and the shoulders of the flopper. So instead of these rough sort of sharp edges cutting a hole through the fish and potentially opening a bigger hole for you to tear out or pull out, it just gives you a nice clean entry and exit wound on that fish. So I mean, I think it's worth the extra few bucks to have it put on, if nothing else, for placebo effect, but for purposes of tuning the shaft, doesn't really matter.
I bet it would even help for like a long range shot.
A little more hydrodynamic.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot of people out there, myself included, that have taken a shot on a pelagic and it's at distance and goes into the gill plate and then stops right
on the shoulder. Yeah, right on the shoulder of the flopper.
And falls right back out. That might
open
give
it up
you that
for you.
extra.
Yeah, grease the wheel a little bit. Yeah, so when you get your shaft, if it is an untuned shaft, you will notice that when you turn it over like that, it will flop loose, and then when you turn it right side up again, it will fall down. The reason that you don't want that is you do want it to be able to fall open nicely, but you want at the very end, you want it to sort of lock in place. So now you can see that flopper's not going anywhere. So that fish could be fighting around, could be banging on rocks, and that flopper is going to stay open even if it's pushed through the fish. If the edge of the fish is here, it's not going to fall flat, and then when it tugs again, it comes sliding back out of the fish. So tuning will give you that flopper doing the right action. And the way that you do that is by using a ball peen hammer. So if you want to come in a little bit closer, you can see here that I bent in the edge of that a little bit. So when it opens up, grabs on this like that. The tools that you use is a ball peen, and you'll just sort of gently work the sides back and forth, bending that flopper until you get it when you roll it slowly around, it doesn't fall back down, but it will still, when it's down like this, it will still open up a little bit. So if you imagine you shot the fish, or you've shot your gun, it's flying through the water like that, the water is keeping it tucked up tight, hits the fish, stays closed, exits the other side, and you want that to open like that, so when it pulls back, now you've got the little bit of pull on it. Another thing that I like to do on my shafts is if you come in close there, is I'll take a pair of pliers and I'll just bend the tiny little end just ever so slightly. So instead of going straight, it's clipped up a little bit. So for whatever reason, if it goes through the fish and doesn't automatically open a little bit, you have that little lip that hopefully will catch onto a piece of the fish and slide it open for you. So yeah, you just sort of gently tap on it, test, flip it over, tap, test until it gives you that action that you're looking for there. If you go over and it just sticks and you can't get it back down, or even worse, if you've bent it so much that it stays up like that, even when down it doesn't open like that, no big deal. Grab a flathead screwdriver, gently put it in there, twist it a little bit, open that metal back up. It's soft enough to where you can work with it and get it really right to the point where it's like that.
Okay, so
take your time. You don't have to really, beat on it too much. Just gently back and forth, and it may take you a few minutes, but it'll be worth it.
almost there.
So here he went a little bit too tight, so he's just using that flathead screwdriver to open it back up a little bit and retest it. I think you're on the right track. Just loosen it up a little bit. So what he's doing there is he's taking a look at where it's actually grabbing onto the shaft and rebending the spot that's grabbing a little bit too tight. Tightening the pin. As long as you get that halfway open, I mean that's going to give you your grab on the fish when it slides back out.
Better than it was.
Looks good to me. If you wanted to keep fiddling with it a little bit, you could.
Yeah, pretty good actually.
Yeah, I like that. You've got it halfway open. It's going to catch the fish. It's going to catch on the flesh right there. Yeah, exactly. You're good to go. And it's going to hold. It's not flopping over. So if he goes bangs it on a rock or something, bangs any part of the shaft on the rock, it's not going to shake closed again to slide back out. It's a pretty good job. So at this point, I'm going to take this shaft, which I know is not the flopper shaft we're working with. I'm going to actually be putting my slip tip shaft onto this gun and rigging it. To begin with, you're just going to load the shaft. Make sure it's loaded properly into the gun. Give it a tug so you can make sure that it's actually in the mechanism. From here, I'm going to take a length of shooting line and I'm going to double wrap this gun. I'm going to take my crimp that is, I believe this is 200-pound mono. So these are going to be 200-pound crimps, and I'm going to slide that through. So you're going to have that on the line. And for me, my attachment point is here. So I'm going to run it through the shaft, back through here. You can see it. There it goes.
If your line is not on the most forward, some are back here, maybe it's back here. You want to be careful where you're putting this. Like if you were to have this too long, it can slide over this. It's much more problem getting tangled. Or if your hole was on this center tab or your back tab and you're coming forward, you don't want to have this so tight that it can get stuck like that. So it's good to leave yourself a little bit, but not so much that you're going to have problems interfering with the one in the front.
I'm going to burn the end of this. I'm going to get it good and bubbly. And then I use just the base of this to flatten it out. So you get a nice flat cap on there. And then like Myrran was saying, we're now going to pull that line back through and adjust our loop to where we still have a big enough loop to where it can play and not get hung up, but not have so much to where it's going to get tangled up on anything else that you may have around. So for this particular setup, I think I'm going to want it right about in here. Would you agree with that, Myrran? So we're going to take our crimps, and you can notice here that there's different size slots on the crimps. So I'm going to choose the right size, which for this one is a 1 to 2 millimeter. And if you look, if you want to get in real close there, you don't want to crimp all the way out to the end at all. You want to leave a little bit of a collar there outside of the crimp. You're going to squeeze down until you can't squeeze anymore. The crimps will stop at the correct spot. You can see there that I've crimped that spot. And then you're going to move to the opposite end and doing the same thing, leaving a little bit of a collar there. You don't want to go all the way to the end. Squeeze all the way down until you hear they touch together. You can't squeeze anymore. And now you've got yourself a finished crimp. That's not going anywhere. So at this point now, I'm going to string my gun. So you pull it up under the bands. Get all this through. This shooting line here, for purposes of this video, it's already pre-measured. But if you're doing this without a measurement on it, give yourself extra. Mono is cheap. You know, you want more. You don't want to have to redo the whole thing. So give yourself a few feet extra to play with. And you're going to pull through here. This gun, I go under the holding, over the shaft, down through there. I'm going to go back, round, tuck in there. Okay, up around here, back down again, up around here again, and now, back there. And this last one is where I'm going to attach it to the shooting line, or excuse me, to the reel line. Normally, if you had that extra amount, you don't want to have this swivel right up tight there. That's going to be weird. This one's going to set up, it's going to be right about in the middle. I'm going to create another loop there, which will put my swivel right about there. So again, like before, run the shooting line through the swivel, run it back through. Always melt the ends of every knot that you do. I like to go down into the blue part of the flame. I find that the mono doesn't go as black and nasty. Give yourself a nice exaggerated flat top there. Nice comfortable size loop, not too big, not too small. Grab your crimps, back into the correct slot. Making sure you're leaving a little bit extra of the metal crimp out there. You don't want to go all the way to the end. Crimp all the way down. Back to the other side. Crimp all the way down, and now you can attach it to your swivel like this, reel it in tight, and you're done. I think I did it without saying to do it. But when you make that flat part on the end of your shooting line, you're going to want to pull it back through to where it's touching crimp. You don't want to leave a tag end out there. That's just something that's going to get hung up, you know, snagged somewhere. You want to keep that all the way up nice and tight against a swivel like that.
A single swivel is going to be fine for most things around here. A lot of people swear by putting 2 swivels on there, or crimps rather. You can't go wrong with 2 crimps. It just spreads out the load a little bit. 1 crimp is going to be fine if you're shooting for rockfish, even yellowtail. 1 crimp is going to be fine, but you start getting into the bigger things, and certainly when you start getting into cable, you're going to want to do 2.
Yeah, why don't we talk a little bit, why don't you walk them through the different types of shooting lines there are between the mono and the cable?
There's a ton of different lines. You know, I think we're covering kind of the beginning stuff right here. This gun right here is rigged up. I believe this is 7-strand cable. It's coated. This is pretty much what they're using down here for the bluefin. Also Wahoo. For Wahoo, you could probably go a slightly smaller. Bigger is stronger and better. You start to sacrifice range the thicker shooting line you get, especially for these smaller reef guns around here. If you're shooting calicos, even yellowtail down here, they're not going to be pulling a lot, so you don't need a 250-pound test shooting line for anything like yellowtail and on down. Even white sea bass probably don't need 250-pound. You're pulling that much pressure, you're going to pull out of that soft fish anyway. So you sacrifice range and accuracy with the thicker shooting line. So there's benefits to going down. There's also bad things about going down. The thicker your cable line is, the less chance that you're going to have of cutting your fish. If you ever played a reel or strung a yellowtail or something, and the only thing going through there now is your shooting line, obviously a thicker one's going to be better. It's going to allow you to put more pressure without cutting through the flesh of the fish. You don't have to worry about that stuff with sheephead. You don't have to worry about that with calicos or anything smaller than that. I would go for one of my favorite lines that I use, and Petros sells this over there. It's a high performance. Basically what it is tennis racket line is the secret. You can buy tennis racket line in bulk. It's got it's got some markings right here. This is Pro line, basically. It took me a while to Google to find out what the heck this stuff is, but it is tennis racket line. This stuff I think is a 150-pound braid, and it's kind of like a plastic coated cable. It's really thin in diameter compared to maybe the same. I think this is 250-pound right here, and this is I think 150-pound of just regular mono. This stuff crimps and bends a little more, especially when you're going around the back end here or the front end here. You'll notice in your shooting line you'll get like a bend in it. This stuff's really good for that. I've also noticed on this type of line, because it's multiple strands versus a solid strand, if you get nicks and tears in this, it's gonna retain a lot more strength. If you get a nick or a tear in this single strand, chances are it's gonna break. So this is a little more resilient. If you're lazy and you don't like to change your line as much as I do, I'll go through a whole season with the same setup.
Yeah, which it's a good point that he brings up on your mono. If you're using mono as your shooting line, before you go out each time, run your finger down it, just feel it. If you're feeling any nicks, mars, anything like that, you gotta judge it for yourself. I would change it. People start worrying about the cost of changing mono, but you know, you get down there, you see your first white sea bass or a slug sea bass, and you shoot them, and that nick causes your line to break, you're gonna be pretty bummed that you didn't spend a couple bucks to switch out your mono. I always keep a big spool of mono around. Actually, Myrran just taught me about that tennis racket line, so I think I'm gonna probably pick up some bulk of that and start using that as well.
Yeah, Petros sells that down there also. It's all set up with the right size crimps and everything. That's a little more expensive, but I feel like it's worth it. One of the areas, you know, when you do have breakages in your line, this spot right here is a very common spot. It's getting friction in here. It's getting pulled right here all the time in the same spot. This is one of the spots that is the most likely spot for your shooting line to fail. Another thing, when you're getting new shafts, these holes in here, sometimes they're smoothed out, but sometimes that hole has some rough edges and burrs. Make sure to check your shaft for that. See if it's sharp in there. If it is, you can get in there with a little bit of sandpaper or a fine file and clean up that hole so it's...
If you have a piece of thicker cable, a round cable shooting line,
you
can run the cable through there, put this in a vise, and just go back and forth and work at rubbing all the different corners of that with your cable, and it'll take some of those burrs off as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. So inspecting your shooting line, this one I can feel it has quite a bit of burrs, but again,
I didn't want to say anything.
Well, that's the benefit of this line.
Yeah,
because I am lazy,
yeah.
You know, and other people are like me too, where I don't want to change it every time I go out. People do that every time they go out. Jeremy Calkins, he likes to change his shooting line like nearly every time he goes out. Yeah. But it's those failures that haunt you that create that habit of making sure you check your gear, making sure everything's fresh, because when you have a break off, you never forget about it.
Yeah.
You know. So I have a band here, and we'll just go through the basics of putting a wishbone in the band and show you how to do the constrictor knot. The wax line that you use for the constrictor knot is pretty specific and it ties on itself, but for this purpose, so everybody can see properly, we're going to use this shooting line. And in a pinch, a line like this will work. It's better to have that wax line, but if you have some of this thin shooting line that really grips on itself, I mean, you can pretty much use anything. I have these bands. These are some old bands, but they're tapered. And one way you can taper these bands, a lot of people don't, but if you want to, you can just take a nail, put the nail in the end there and see where the head is. Then you can take this and put it on your bench grinder and it'll give you something to go to. So a longer nail would work a little bit better than this, but this gives you that, makes it rigid. Obviously you're trying to press this down, it's gonna squeeze all over the place. But if you have a shaft or nail in there, you're going to be able to then rotate this and it's going to stay straight. And you can just taper it down to the head of the nail and that'll be fine.
I will say that on a, like a 5-band gun, having a little bit less bulk sitting there on the shark fins is helpful when you're looking down the muzzle.
Yeah, that's true. Very true. But, it's not needed.
It's sexier.
It's a little sexier. There's different shooting lines or wishbone material that you can use. This is some really thick stuff. I like to reuse mine. This is some line that I got down at Spear America. On these, to tie the knot, you can just do like a double overhand. It'll be just fine. It's literally 2 granny knots. So 1, 2. You want to keep it kind of big. What you're going to notice is it's going to do this like figure 8. That's what you want. Just kind of cinch that down. So you have those 2 barrels there, nice and wide. And that's going to be just fine. Again, there's probably multiple knots there that you could do, but something like that is just fine.
And also keep in mind, cut off the tag end, melt it up flat against it. He can show you here how he did that on his
Yeah,
knot.
same, cut off, melt, push it in. It's going to hold. So you want a nice little ball on the end there. We could use whatever. A pair of pliers. You want to lube the inside of this up. It's going to assist you in putting the knot in. And you can put the knot in some soap. You can just put this in your mouth and spit in it. Get it a little wet in there. Run it in the water. Yeah, maybe we leave that part out. But a little bit of soap on the knot. It's going to help it slide. Pair of needle nose pliers. Try to find the narrow part, just like that.
It's not easy, so don't get frustrated. It takes some practice.
Just kind of push it in there.
Further than you think you need.
Yeah, well, this is kind of where the screwdriver comes into play too, that you can use. Is you can hold that in there and then take out your pliers. And you're in there, but you can take this screwdriver and find the knot and just push it down farther.
The idea is that you want the knot beyond where you're going to put your constrictor.
Yeah, so now my knot's down here in this area, which is just fine. There's the other way to do it. You can just lay this over the top, and then you want to take this line and grab it here, and you're going to twist it in the same way. You don't want to twist it this way because you're untwisting it. So take it like this and do a twist. And then come down to the bottom here. And there it is. So then you can just put this on here. You can see there's your constrictor knot there. Get your pliers, get some wraps on there.
Yeah, you notice he left himself a nice long tag end there because you want to...
Yeah, it takes a lot more than... When you buy some of this stuff, or you buy whatever, you want to get extra because you use a lot more than you might think. So there's your knot, and you just want to pull the daylights out of it. Basically as hard as you can. And you're not going to cut through the band, and you're not going to break the line. And so that has tightened onto itself and is not going to come loose. Now we'll do the same thing. You want to leave yourself some line. Don't cut it all the way flush because you want to melt it.
The top of
Again, leave yourself some line. Now we got our tags. Really melt it and then push it flat. Same here. So that is not coming out. Now I got this. Pull it back out. Now the knot's right there and we're good to go. So you can just repeat that process with this side. Some guns you can tie the bands before you put it in the gun because there's a slot. Mine, home build, and some other ones there's no slot. So you'd want to feed this through your gun obviously first so you can get it in. If you're going to do the knot the way that I showed you to do, you won't be able to put it on if it's already connected. So an essential step is to go ahead and do your knot one more time. Give myself a little more. Again, it's laid over, twisting the same way through. put this on, tighten it up a little so it doesn't fall off. Then you'll put your wishbone in there again, slide this down to where you want it, and cinch it off, and you're done. Got that there. We'll get a little bit of soap, put it on here. There's that. Right there.
Yeah, don't try to wrap it around your hands and do this. Wrap it around.
Yeah,
Cool.
you won't be able to get it tight enough if you just try to use your hands. That's probably a little too much. This obviously wasn't done with the right line, but just goes to show it'll work.
Yeah, we'll have future videos talking about how to actually set up your bands, the measurements correctly, the wishbones correctly, and things like that. For the purposes of this video, we just wanted to make sure that you knew how to put your wishbone in and tie it off right.
So you could do 2 of these. A lot of my buddies do. I do doubles.
I do.
You do?
And I do the fold over on one side, and then on the second one, I'll put it on the bottom side so the constrictors are actually opposite.
Oh, so
one
they're
another.
opposite?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I don't. I'm lazy. But I don't have a lot of failures. I think I've only had 1 fail.
Which is funny because I've had 2 or 3.
Oh, yeah? Not strong enough, though. But again, if you want to skip all this madness, you can just go to Spear America, and those guys will do it right. And
well, also,
it's not expensive.
If it fails, you don't have to blame yourself. You can.
That's right. You can, go back there.
Say it was their fault, it wasn't my fault.
But yeah, that does suck if it fails. But if you have your kit and it fails,
you're on a boat, you're on a charter.
You're on a charter, you can just redo it.
Yeah.
So making sure you have your kit, your pliers, and some extra line, some scissors, a lighter, extra swivels, extra wishbones. If you have a gun that you can insert the bands afterwards, you can have pre-made bands ahead of time and just bring those with you. If you have a failure, just swap it out, and that literally just takes seconds. So being prepared is the name of the game, and the rest is luck.
I think we've got a bunch of good information out here. If you have any questions for us, anything specific, you can feel free to hop on the website, ocspearos.org, and you can reach out to us directly through the website. If you want more content like this, we are funded by our members, so we encourage you to sign up for membership. We're a 501c3 public benefit corporation, so all of the money that we collect goes into doing things like this, doing events throughout the year, all for the benefit of the sport and for the dive and spearfishing community at large. So you can edit this back in prior. So another way, the way that Myrran showed on how to make this band, he had a pre-measured wishbone. So if he knew his gun inside and out, and he knew that it was tuned correctly at this exact wishbone length, then he would just do it like that. He'd save himself a couple extra steps. In this scenario, you can see that I have the wishbone attached to these little pieces of reel line. And so you are going to go like, fold it in half, tie just a regular granny knot in it, and then pull that back towards the end, like that. And again, as always, it might be a little bit too much. As always, we're gonna melt that. Push it back on itself so it can't pull through. Pull it tight. And then now what you can do is you can, instead of pushing the direct wishbone through, you can push this down into the line. This one's a little bit big, you can see. The way that you want to measure it is have your knot just below the constrictor there. I just wanted to make it big so you can see it in the video. You'd set it down in there. And what's the benefit of that? So as you can see for the band for this gun, this was a band that I took off with the Oceanborn. You can actually quickly test and modify. Man, that guy's on there. I've cut the ends off of most of my fingers, so I don't have much feeling in any of them. True story. So what you do is fold that over. Almost got it. When you're practicing with it in the pool or in the ocean and really trying to see what the most accurate setup is, your wishbone length is a big part of that. So what you could do when you first get it is you could make a bunch of these wishbones. You could make one 1/4 inch bigger, 1/2 inch bigger, and just have all different measurements. And then once you're in the water and testing, you can swap them out. And it's as simple as putting through the eyelet like that. Again, no feeling in the fingers. Okay, so you put it through like that, wrap around the loops. You're gonna come around like this, back up through like this. Pull down, that's not going anywhere. Do it over here as well. So now, rather than if you wanted to test a bunch of wishbones lengths, instead of having to retie your constrictor knots and push them back through the band every time, you've got your loop that's already down in there, your constrictor stays, you're just changing your wishbone. Wishbones don't break often, but they do break. You could see this one is a little bit tired. It's frayed a little bit. So there's a possibility that this fails. So if you keep a little bit of wishbone material in your bag, and you have these loops, you can easily make a new wishbone, put it in there. So that's just a different setup to achieve the same thing.